Good evening, friends, and welcome back to this week's discussion on the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. And just before the class began, as before we came online, I was speaking with Bara in the background, who's a technical assistant, about the format for today's classes and also for the coming weeks. We're going to enter into a different phase of the Yoga Sutras, where Patanjali begins a discussion of those topics which most people, when we speak about the Yoga Sutras, are familiar with, because it's the essence of what's commonly known as the teachings of Raja Yoga, the teachings of Ashtanga Yoga, that eight-limbed path that is very familiar to many of you who are students of yoga, and the subjects that are incorporated when those eight-limb path is two of the beginning steps of that are yama and niyama. And what I'd like to do in the coming weeks is to approach this rather, I don't care to give a discourse on each of these topics, or rather have a discussion about these. Now, there is a place for discourse, and I'm making an assumption here that those of you who are joining in on this discussion have some familiarity with yoga and with Ashtanga Yoga and with these particular topics we're going to be talking about. And if this is all new to you, I recommend, I hope what we share in question and answer will be useful to you. But I would refer you to take one of the courses that Ananda Sangha offers in various formats online, or in one of our Kriya preparation courses, a Raja Yoga course, which basically approaches these topics we're going to be discussing in more of a class-oriented approach. And that may prove useful to you if these are new. But I suspect most of you have some familiarity with this, and maybe your Kriya bonds already, and you've been meditating or had studied these topics already. And so I want to begin with the topic, with this discussion. I want to give a little bit of an overview first, share some thoughts, and then I want to invite you to be thinking about the topic today, we're going to address, which is the topic of yama, and the yamas of the various five specific yamas that Patanjali outlines in the Yoga Sutras. And so you might be thinking of, there are many things in Ashtanga Yoga that you could ask, but let's keep our questions focused on that aspect, the yamas today, the five yamas, and we can get some clarity on that and discuss that. And if you have some particular observations that might be novel, you share those as well. And you can put those in the chat box, and then Bara will direct them as the time comes. We'll discuss those. And I want to start first by just giving the reading, particularly here, that Patanjali, this topic in general that we're going into now, of what Patanjali says. This is in Book 2. It's number Sloka 28. He begins, "The practice of the several limbs of yoga, by the practice of the several limbs of yoga, impurities disappear, and the light of pure wisdom and discrimination dawns. The eight limbs of yoga are yama, niyama, asana, pranayama, pratyahara, dharana, dhyan, and samadhi." And Swamiji here translated it into yama niyama: posture, withdrawal of energy, interiorization of the mind, concentration, meditation, and absorption. And then the very next sloka, number 30 of Book 2, is the yamas consist of non-harmfulness, non-deceit or truthfulness, non-covetousness, continence, and non-attachment. And again, these are coming from Swami's book, Demystifying Patanjali. And then he goes on with the other limbs, you could say, of Ashtanga Yoga after that, which we'll cover in weeks coming. But I'd like to start by just giving an overview of a few thoughts that come to mind when we're speaking about Ashtanga Yoga and when we start coming to these yamas and niyamas as well. And we have to realize that these 8 limbs are stages through which everyone passes, regardless of their particular path, regardless of their outer practices, regardless of their culture, regardless of their religion. It's not like in itself a set of beliefs. Well, I choose to believe that. Other people believe other things. And that takes me to a story that Swami Kriyananda used to tell. I used to tell it early when I first met him because it was closer in his memory to his personal experience at that time. But when he was a young man serving Yogananda's organization, SRF, when in India in the late 1950s, 1960, 61, there was a time when he would travel about the country doing programs at that time, and he was in Rajasthan. And he was on a bus going from one place to another in Rajasthan. And as the bus was going down the highway, it came to a place where the roadway had been washed out. The monsoons, thunderstorms had washed it out. And the bus had to make a little bit of a detour off the road and to get by this one difficult spot. And as much of Rajasthan is, it's sandy. And so the soil was very sandy and the bus got stuck. And so the bus driver trying to go forward and backward, get unstuck, he couldn't do it. And so he asked all the passengers, well, here we are. He asked the passengers to get out of the bus and to help him and to push the bus. And when he couldn't get it unstuck. So they were working at it. And he was trying to go forward and backward and trying to, as you do, rock the bus out of the rut that it had created for itself with everybody pushing, but it was making no progress until wondering what's going on here. And the bus driver finally, he gets out of the bus and he looks and he notices that half the passengers are on the back end of the bus pushing it forward, and another half the passengers are on the forward end pushing the bus backward, and he was making no progress. And so he gets out and gets everybody to get in the back, all pushed together in the same direction, and he got the bus out. And now Swami loved that story because it demonstrated or illustrated something. And it's something I was also referring to last week. If you were joining us last week, I talked about directionality. Life is directional, pushing all of us. If we want to succeed, we have to align our energies in a certain direction. Now, this presupposes in life that there is a direction that we're going toward. And of course, this is what we addressed last week, that life does have a direction. But Swami used to tell this story in context of an issue that he addressed quite frequently in the middle part of the 20th century and a little bit after that. It was very popular in those days. There was a philosophical system had arisen in the 20th century philosophical point of view in the West particularly, but it had its impact worldwide, and it was the philosophy of existentialism. Now, I admit at the beginning here, I'm not an expert on existentialism, nor of Jean-Paul Sartre, who was the exponent, particularly of that system philosophy. But essentially, the idea was that we create our own meaning in life. And through our own will and choices that we make, we create our own meaning. Now, perhaps on a limited scale, there might be some truth to that, but interpreted by many others, it began to be interpreted in a sense that life has no inherent meaning. And this, of course, is the essence of nihilism, another philosophy. It has no inherent meaning. There's no particular direction. As they sometimes say, some people say tomato and some people say tomato. it doesn't matter which one you say. It's just where you were brought up, what language you choose to come from. And culturally, you expand this idea of it doesn't matter to cultures. One culture decides this is a good way to go, other cultures are that, and we shouldn't judge other people's values. We shouldn't judge other people's decisions they make or choices they make. And obviously, you say, yeah, that's true. Gosh, we don't want to be judgmental about things. And pretty soon you get the idea that it says, well, it doesn't matter. There's everything. And you see, as Einsteinian relativity, everything is relative. But even Einstein, of course, said it's all relative according to, there is one thing that's not relative, that's the speed of light. But in moral values, one moral value is just as good as the next. Now, you could see that if you take this to a certain direction, because nobody wants to be judging each other and what it is, it can have certain implications. And this for society in general, and this was becoming a quite popular thing in that part of the 20th century and later. And then I was a young man at that time. I very much remember that in college, we used to, have different phrases, different strokes for different folks. Whatever you choose, it's just as good as what I choose. Well, as life has gone on, I don't know if that's really all that true. Is that true? Is there no direction to life? And as I came to the study of yoga, and this is what Patanjali here is, why this is very important. He's saying, no, there is a direction. Yoga postulates we don't live in a meaningless world. There is a direction to life, and that direction is toward freedom. Freedom, and what is holding us back is bondage, as we've been discussing in the weeks prior. Bondage, egotism, all of these things are holding us back from our divine goal, which is to be free. Or if that seems too exalted, let us say our goal, our worldly goal even, of being happy. And of course, one person might say, well, I'm happy when I'm a bully and I like to bully people. I'm happier when I have people to bully. Of course, here I'm being a little facetious, but you get the idea that I choose my medicine, you might say, or my poison. This makes me happy, but does it really make you happy in the long term, in the broader term of compared to if we accept this idea, this thought, and I consider reality, that there is a direction to be in life, to be truly happy, not by what circumstances dictate us, but if in that sense of soul freedom, freedom that everybody seeks. I'm free. I can make my choices. I can be a bully or I cannot be a bully. So I'm free. I can choose my reality. I can choose my this is the basis of existentialism. I can choose in life. And it's one choice is not necessarily as good as the other choice if we compare it to what we have, if we have a certain goal, which is freedom from ego, freedom from habits, freedom from those things that make us miserable in the end. And if we see life in those terms, then we realize that rather than being on one side pushing one way and another side of our life pushing the other, if we can align ourselves in a direction that is going to take us toward freedom, those things that give us true happiness, then we find that we're working together. And this is the essence of what we're speaking about when we speak about these first two limbs of Ashtanga Yoga. Yama, you might say the proscriptions, those things which we should not do, and prescriptions, which is those things that we should do. And if we can understand that, we align ourselves in a direction that's going to take us ultimately where we want to go. And so as we discuss these things, let's see it in those terms. And that is, you might say, the first thing I ask of us here. But we must understand that no one of these stages, right? Whether it's the various yamas, various niyamas, or whether it's the 8 limbs of Ashtanga Yoga, no one stage can be perfected on its own without perfection in all of them. So what I'm saying here is they are interdependent. So in other words, they're not sequential in the sense that, well, since ahimsa is generally, harmlessness is generally listed as the first one, I must first become perfected in ahimsa before I can progress to, asteya or truthfulness, satya, the second or third one. No, we have to, all of these must be approached at the same time. And also expanding that, it's not that we must become perfected in these virtues of yama niyama before we can progress to the subsequent stages of asana, pranayama, pratyahara, and so forth. No, but they all go together and they all reinforce them together. So you would say in the practice of yama, in the practice of ahimsa even, samadhi is implied, you see, because it's the seed. We have to perfect ourselves in samadhi, that higher state, in order for we're truly going to be able to perfect ourselves in ahimsa. Now, but nevertheless, these yamas niyamas are a little bit more understandable to our daily life and to our awareness, because we understand what it means not to steal from somebody else, where we may not really understand so much what it means to be in samadhi. You could say they are stepping stones that all of us, some that are a little bit more easier to understand, not necessarily to perfect, but to understand, and then we go further along as we go, as each of these steps become a little bit more subtle to our worldly awareness. And so we think of it in terms of that way. You could say that these first ones, yamas, niyamas, they plug the holes in our milk pail. This, if you're a farmer and you're milking the cow, if your pail has holes in it, you're not going to gain very much. So you could say all of us, we need to plug those holes in our behavior, in our thinking, and our attitudes that drain us. You could say drain the energy away from us. So we have something to offer. If we want to offer ourselves up to God, if we want to offer ourselves into the divine awareness, what do we have to offer if it's all drained away? And so you could think of it in those ways. It's plugging the holes. It's foundational things. And these things are not foreign to us. You might say it's the next point. There are basic realities of human nature. And you could say by perfecting these, they're intended to help fulfill that nature, round out our human nature, and they're not culturally specific. You might say, oh, well, in China they do this, and in Uruguay they do that, and one's as good as the next. Well, it's true that there are cultural realities. Some cultures focus on certain aspects of human nature more than others do, but we all possess them, you see, and they are directional. And depending which culture we have, I know, some cultures are much more intellectual than others. Some cultures are much more devotional than others. But yet both reasoning and love are needed. And so culturally, there's certain things, and I suppose you could say that we as souls that continue to reincarnate, we're drawn to certain cultures, perhaps to perfect those qualities or develop those qualities even further, or perhaps we're missing those qualities and we need to develop them. So who knows? But they exist on a spectrum of directionality in all cultures. And so what we're looking for is we're looking for freedom. And now, if you go down to, which is one thing I'm going to point out with all of these qualities, is freedom from what? From habits, bad habits, misbehavior, yes, that bind us. And we've gone over in previous classes various bondages, but underlying all of those bondages is those, from the very beginning, we mentioned about yoga is the neutralization of those vrittis, the calming of the vrittis, that when when they're uncalm, they give rise to this consciousness of ego. And so what we're trying to do is overcome that ego consciousness, and certain behaviors stimulate ego. Certain behaviors calm the ego. And so here all of these yamas, niyamas, they're going to go back to that basic principle of calming the vortices of chitta, and with the end result being the relaxation of ego consciousness in it. And if we look at each one, and I'm going to give an example here. Let's start, and then I'm going to want to open this up to your questions. And you could see that this may take more than one session here. Even the yamas themselves may take more than one session. But if let's say we just take this, you take ahimsa, for example, harmlessness, or is every one of these, you could say, and I recommend, if we're looking for the antidote of, to not create harm, nonviolence, epitomized, and I use this because everybody knows, I think everybody knows what ahimsa means, non-harmfulness, because especially because most of the audience here is in India, and of course it's epitomized by Mahatma Gandhi's life and freedom struggle in India. Well, and Gandhiji himself emphasizes it's not enough just to be nonviolent, which is certainly absolutely essential, but violence is expressed in many different ways. You see, it's violence of physical violence, shooting that British soldier, or being violent, or it's subtler. For the yogi, we're speaking about violence in thought, not only deed, violence in attitude, violence in speech, and violence is a very extreme word, harmful, ill will. You go subtler and subtler little, and for the saint, being harmful for the saint might just be a little bit, in a very just little criticism in some way that's uncalled for, that creates harm in another person, you might say. So harmfulness has its extremes. But Gandhiji himself said, well, really what we're speaking about is we need to be affirmative in the opposite to be able to cure that. So concentrate on benevolence, universal benevolence, divine love. And so you see, so consequently, each of these proscriptions, things we shouldn't do, imply the things that we should do, which is the positive side of it. And for each of us, if we're subject to one of the influences of these niyamas, yes, you have to put somewhat of a fence around ourselves to not continue that behavior, but we also have to emphasize the positive in order to overcome it. And as I say, it's all on a spectrum. Some say tomato, some say tomato, but it's in the direction we know what we mean, no matter how we say it, and that's where we're going. And so I want to open this up and like I said, I'm implying here that you know what these yamas are: nonviolence, truthfulness, non-lying, let's say, truthfulness, non-stealing, covetousness, you might say, non-sensuality, brahmacharya, if use it that word, celibacy on the other side, something to do, withdrawal from the senses, and the fifth one, aparigraha, which would be different translations, but non-possessiveness, uh, non-greed, uh, non-attachment. And as we know, and we can get into this later, each of these in their perfection develop a certain power within us. And we'll come to that at another time. But I want to open it up first just to questions, and then we can explore these 5 elements that I just outlined. And then let's see how that goes. And if it turns out that people don't know what these things are, then next week I'll come back and give a little bit further. But I'm making an assumption here that I got an audience who has studied these things. So let's see if that's true. So anyway, I've asked Bara Keel to be the moderator and to be the one so I don't have to be looking back and forth at the chat box. And I'm going to, Bara, give me a moment. I'm going to put my earbuds in so I get clearer reception. Okay. Well, do we have any questions? And let's see where this goes, how this goes.
Thank you, Jayaji, for that. And yes, remember, type your questions in the chat. We do have a few questions. And the first one is when it comes to truthfulness. And, this person is a little confused on the difference between fact and truth, because Swamiji said that truth is beneficial and facts may not always be the truth, whereas for us it seems that it is the truth. And also asking about what about white lies? Are they fine to do or not?
Well, this is I think that I'm interested. It's interesting you started with them because this is one of the ones that are very subtle. I think of all of them, the very, very subtle where that dividing line is. But Swamiji used to always say, truth is not mere repetition of facts. It's beneficial. He says truth is always beneficial, and so consequently, we have to think in terms of the effect of our words, because facts can never really convey exactly what you are trying to, if you have a thought even, you have to translate it down into words, and they're only an approximation of what you're trying to convey to somebody else. Maybe you're trying to be helpful to somebody else or trying to guide somebody else. So you have to realize, is the result of my action going to be beneficial? Now, beneficial not just in the, telling a little white lie can be beneficial or can be harmful even to do that. You have to think of the larger impact. And I remember a story that I think most of you, all of you know Nayaswami Jaya. She said she went to visit her mother in the hospital, who had just had heart surgery. And she was there with her sister. And she and her sister went into the hospital room, and they saw their mother on the hospital bed hooked up to all of these tubes coming out of her. And she looked on the outside, that didn't look so good. She looked like she was on death's door. And her sister immediately let out a scream, and started weeping. And Diana looked at her and immediately hustled her out the door because she was merely reacting, from her emotional reaction to seeing her mom in such a bad state. And her mom and Diana came back and said, "Mom, you're looking, you just been come out of surgery. You're doing great. Think about how you started feeding her the positive. Now, did she look great? Well, that's a matter of subjective interpretation. Compared to being dead, she certainly looked great. She was alive and she was on the road to recovery. And so which one was the truth? And so Gianno's was beneficial because it helped her mom get to a better space in her life. And so, yes, but there are times we know when we have to make it, and sometimes Swami says, sometimes the best you can do is simply be quiet. And you say, how does I look? If somebody says, a woman comes out, and she's put on a new dress. She thinks she looks pretty good. You don't think looks so good. And and Swami would say, what are you going to say? you could say, well, you know, it's interesting. It's not my style, but if it makes you happy, I think it's obviously making you happy. So, hey, go with it. And although you may think, you know, you don't like it, you could be silent. But yet you have to think of the larger whole. And so untruthfulness, you could say is one of the things of being untruthful is to wishing the world or circumstances were different than they are. That's not being truthful. And I could say anything that you could say in philosophically, deceit or lying is anything that reinforces our identity of that we're this body, that we are this or that, or reinforces Maya in some way, or affirms something false rather than really what is not truthful. But yet, factuality is not really the answer either. And we have to be, and it is subtle. And I can't say that I can give you one, but which one will bring greater joy in the long run without causing a person to be bypass, go down a byway. So you have to use when somebody asks you something, to give pure fact is not necessarily truthful. I remember there was a story about this. I think it was from the life of Ram Gopal Mazumdar. And, he speaks in the autobiography. He says, oh, yes, I was in seclusion in the Himalayas for 18 years, or then another spell for another 20 some years. So he was a classical yogi in the Himalayas, in Samadhi, by the way. And so he was a completely liberated soul. Well, he was in a cave up there, and it so happened, the story goes, that he had perfected ahimsa. And so in order to perfect one, he had to be perfect also in truthfulness. And so in the area, there was a tiger in the area that was causing trouble, and hunters were out looking for the tiger and to shoot it. But you see, the tigers would come into the cave where Ram Gopal was, and they would come in, and he would share his cave with the tigers. And so the hunters came to his cave, said, we're looking for a tiger. We want to kill it and shoot it. And have you seen this tiger? And Ram Gopal, he said, no, I haven't. I haven't seen that tiger. And sometime later, one of his disciples, I think, was there at that time and says, well, Ram Gopal, I think you told a lie. And because tigers come in here all the time. And Ram Gopal says, tiger? That's not a tiger. That's my pillow. So now I don't know if that's a true story or not. So please don't say that's gospel. I've just heard that story. And of course, no, was Ram Gopal lying or not? No, he's not telling the truth. And it was and this is the difficulty we run in. But I think you have to look at the long run. And of course, Ram Gopal probably knew he probably could talk to that tiger to get him to go elsewhere. And so it is, you have to judge that. And I think one of the things when I find myself in a situation that is difficult, I tend to want to be silent and not answer. But on the other hand, that sometimes is you're basically avoiding a situation. What is beneficial for everybody? And that has to be, because what's going to bring the highest welfare? Now, you have to be extremely self-honest in this, and we're going to come to self-honesty later, because what is your motives here? You see, are you attached? Are you feeling emotionally bound by any of these? And so I always realize that being a unfree soul in that way, if I'm subtle in one way, I have to accept, and I'm willing to accept the karma for it. If you're not willing to accept the karma of whatever, if you make a mistake, then be careful and don't get involved in telling lies, because you have to accept the karma. So sometimes you tell a little white lie because it's pleasing to the listener, but it's not factually true. Sometimes I feel that's the higher thing to do in the situation, not always, because it's for their benefit and it doesn't matter so much. But if I'm wrong, I accept the karma for that, and I say, God, correct me in such a way. I accept that I made a mistake here. So I that's about the best I could do. But it's extremely subtle. There's not an absolute right or wrong. Are you willing to accept it, the karma for your mistake, if you make a mistake? And what's in the larger interest of everybody? It's a soul interest, not in necessarily the momentary interest. So.
Thank you, Jaya. I think that's one of the most complicated or subtle questions. Like, where is the boundary and all that?
Where's the boundary? You can't draw an absolute. These are not absolutes, and it depends on the person that you're working with here. Their understanding, the other person's. Where are they on the spectrum? Some people, like I've said many times in these classes, most people, when they ask for your opinion on something on themselves, they don't really want to hear the truth. They want to be assuaged. And oftentimes they want their ego assuaged. And sometimes you have to assuage that person's ego and say, yeah, it's okay, you're doing okay, when really, but if you tell them the literal truth, it might destroy their confidence. And so you have to be, you have to tell the little bit, hey, you're doing great. And deep down, I'm thinking, well, maybe not yet, but relative to where they could be, they are doing better. There's good, better, and best. And you have to understand, what is the person's understanding?
Well, this is a little bit related, but the question is, when it comes to non-violence, basically, if someone has a bad idea, how can you give them criticism or tell them that it's a bad idea without harming or killing their enthusiasm?
Killing their enthusiasm. And that, you see, oftentimes these questions, and I'm not saying this is the case in whoever asked that question, we're looking for easy answers. We're looking for a rule book, right? I mean, and this is what religion often gives us. Oh, here's a big book. Here's the rules of Manu. Just follow that rule and whatever it says. It's not as easy as that. Manu is asking us to use our brains also and our intelligence. And same thing, in Christian religion. Oh, thou shalt not. Well, same thing here. You have to attune yourself to the needs of the individual you're speaking with. But of course, since we're not perfected beings and we don't always know, we have to err on the side of caution, I would say, not to be. And if somebody has a bad idea, you could couch it in the proper language. I don't know, that doesn't resonate with me. But if you really, really want to do that, well, just be careful. Take it one step at a time. Give them some practical advice. It's not always totally either this or totally either that. You have to attune what's going to help move them in the direction. Now, sometimes people are so insistent on doing what they want to do, you just have to let them suffer the consequences. Maybe that's the best advice. And I kind of recommend that if their life is at stake, obviously you're not going to take that approach but if it's just a matter of fact, if they go in the wrong direction, they're going to harm themselves, they're going to cause themselves a little bit of pain. Is that a bad thing? Maybe not. Sometimes that's the best way to learn something. So it's, again, any of these questions are asking us to be subtle and dive deep into our advice. Swami Kriyananda would not give advice easily, because people would, it's not always best for people just to look to a rule book. They have to learn for themselves, and he would accept that. You have to learn your lessons. But if it was very, very important, he would say something, because he could see that you were going to step off a cliff, and then that would, set you back. And then you have to always ask, is the person wanting advice? Are they open to receiving the advice? And the interesting thing I find is you could say, go north, and that person is certain that you said to go south. Because that's how they're going to hear it. And so so again, here I'm equivocating, because all of these 5 things are in the same. You could have raised the same very subtle question: good, better, best, direction. Is that person tamasic? Well, they don't need advice on how to be sattvic. They need advice on how to be rajasic. And as you see, which is maybe not your cup of tea. You don't necessarily want that. But what's in their interest? What will benefit them in the long run? And also you have to consider the short run too, because it's the short steps that take us to the long run. So you have to judge this, and what direction will be taking. Again, you cannot use a rule book. And you can use a rule book for general guidance, but when it comes down to the specific, you have to use your intuition. And you have to help stimulate the recipients, consider that, as well. And so these are all intuitive understandings, but they apply in every culture, across the board with everyone.
Right. Now, there is 2 questions from 2 different people that I don't know if they are as much with the subject of the Yamas. Perhaps it's for the Niyamas, but I will let you judge this. The first one is, how do I differentiate between judgment and discrimination? And the second one is, how to differentiate between tolerance and indifference.
Well, actually, those are pretty general questions, aren't they? Say the first one again. I'll go to the first in order.
Between judgment and discrimination, how to differentiate?
Well, judgment. There is a certain amount of judgment, and the word judgment can be used in discrimination, but it's off the way it's commonly used. Judgment is often based upon that person who is judging. You're bringing into the equation your likes and dislikes. So Barakil, I'm judging you if I don't like, X, Y, Z, and it's based upon my own likes and egoic likes and dislikes. And this is how, now the word judgment doesn't necessarily have to be that, but when we use it in common language, we judge according to our standards, and our standards are all based upon likes and dislikes usually. Whereas discrimination is something I'm discriminating for my own sake. You see, judgment seems to be I'm judging something outside is happening out there. This is in common language now. Whereas when I discriminate, I can be discriminating whether you're making that a good choice or not, based upon your situation, but I'm getting out of my own self, thinking about you and discriminating, is he going in a direction that's going to uplift him or is he not? But particularly about myself, is it taking me toward freedom or is it taking me toward bondage? Now, I'm judging to make that sense, but I'm not discriminating. Is that making that decision outside of my personal likes and dislikes? So viveka, it would be putting my own likes and dislikes aside and trying to determine a larger standard. Now, is it possible to get totally outside of my likes and dislikes? As long as I'm ego bound, not entirely, but nevertheless, my attempt to do that. So they can be the same thing, but depending upon the amount of ego involvement that's behind that, whether, that person, because it's coming from my own likes and dislikes, and I'm coloring it with that. Now, what was the second one?
The difference between tolerance and indifference.
Yeah, tolerant. I think, well, usually when I tolerate, is I tolerate somebody comes in the room, and I've got a certain judgment about them. Maybe, there's some, this person's a really noisy, restless person, and in my office space, and I've got an office mate, and he sells some sort of product. I'm not quite sure what it is on the internet, and but he's loud. He's kind of he talks loudly, has a loud voice. Now, I can survive easily because I'm hard of hearing, so I take my hearing aid out and I don't hear him. But nevertheless, if I didn't have that, I'd say, "Oh, this guy's really loud." Now, I can tolerate him. I can, it's in other words, I just go with it. Uh, versus what was the opposite again? versus not caring.
Indifferent. Yeah,
Indifference.
indifferent.
Indifference. It was not caring. Indifference is not caring. You see, I'm indifferent to it. So there's a lot of things in life I'm indifferent to, and but there's a lot of things in life I tolerate because I do have an opinion about it. I do like to be calm, but I tolerate it, and I think even better. But intolerance is not enough. I think I accept I like to use that word better because tolerant. I can tolerate my neighbor, but that implies I'm judgmental. There's a certain judgmentalism in my opinions. I'm opinionated. You see, I'm tolerant. I'm overcoming my judgmental attitude by tolerating this person. You see, that's the implication when I hear the word tolerance. But if I say I accept my neighbor, I'm okay with it. But I'm not indifferent to it. I have my own opinion about things. I like calmness. I like peacefulness. And I like silence. But I accept the fact that some people aren't that way, and it's okay. I love them. I love my neighbor, but they're different than me. You see, and there's no energy behind negative energy behind. I'm tolerating somebody, like I'm tolerating that person's religious beliefs. I don't like it, but I'm going to be tolerant. And well, that's certainly better than not. But even better would be I accept and I think that's an aspect of truthfulness, to accept what is. And this person is different than me, and I accept that. And so there's to be indifferent is to be, you might say, passively non-caring, and to have no opinion about anything, much of anything. Not if I think peacefulness is a positive thing, and I prefer peacefulness. If some people aren't, I can accept that. But not to care whether a person's peaceful or not is a lack of energy in my mind. There's no energy there, and there's no direction. I don't have a direction in my own life to be indifferent about something. Now, I realize this is language, and words can be used in because I'm indifferent to the ups and downs of what's happening outside myself because I'm peaceful within myself. That's how we might use it. That sort of indifference of overlooking the ups and downs of one's environment, and that you could say is a positive, relative positive application of the word indifference. But the word itself has an implication of not caring about something and implying that I'm indifferent to one thing, I'm indifferent to lots of everything. Why not just be accepting? And but in a positive way, because you love everything and other people are different. Well, okay, I can accept that. But I have my own, but I have my own inner uh, approach, and the things I love, and I accept everybody. And so I like that word better.
Thank you, Jaya. And I think this is a question very often asked, perhaps even more by men, usually when they are more impersonal, whether they are becoming accepting of things, more impersonal about things, or they just don't care about things. And I think it's good to have
Yeah,
that difference.
I saw this one comment flash across the scene. It's the energy behind it. Yeah, that's true. It is energy, but let's use the word attitude. It's your attitude that are behind it that really kind of determines it. Yeah, that's it. That really determines it. And if your attitude is right, which in other words, your attitude is your state of being that's pointing you toward your goal in life, liberation, freedom, love, joy. If your attitude is right, you're you could be indifferent because these things don't even strike you. I'm not even know, that it's a disturbance. Ah, what? It's just life. Or you notice it, but you accept it. So yeah, okay, whatever. But because you're so engrossed in, pain doesn't even enter your mind. Suffering, it's not there. It's not that you're indifferent to suffering. It's that you're transcended suffering, you see.
Oh, there is a question that, is one of those big questions perhaps, but is person asking, why doesn't God stop violence against animals? And I hope this person also means against everyone, violence. But
why is God, okay, is it true to say that if we expand this question, why does God allow suffering? If, you hear this, you hear people voice this, and it comes out of a state of compassion, a feeling of, sorrow for the sufferings of this world. If this is a beautiful world and God's all love and joy, why does suffering exist? This is the cosmic mystery, and it's the cause. Suffering does not exist in the state of bliss, and we transcend suffering. Until we transcend it, we do live in the world of suffering, and it's been the motivator for the great ones over the years. The Buddha's life is a perfect example of that. How do we overcome? His wasn't how do we find God so much his question, how do we overcome suffering that's in this world? But we live in a world we have to accept. We don't know why this world is created. We can postulate answers to that, but we don't know until we finally get to that state of oneness. Whereas I remember that story of Yogananda, he went into a deep state of samadhi, and he was in that state of samadhi, and in that state of samadhi he was communing with the Divine Mother, the Creator, God in the aspect of Creator of this world. And so he's talking, but in this case, that aspect was the Divine Mother. And he was communing with the Divine Mother, and he was talking back and forth with her, and he was having a conversation. But he was in ecstasy while he was doing this, but he was verbalizing this, and disciples that were there, were amazed at what was going on. Listen, and he was saying, "Oh, mother," and he was asking why, and he says, "Oh, now I understand. Now I understand." But he couldn't verbalize what that understanding was. To us, but you're not going to understand this answer until we transcend it to this world. Why God allows suffering? I remember this question was very, very much in the forefront back in the early, a dozen years ago when that big tsunami came. Remember that? And it, from Indonesia or Malaysia or wherever it was, and thousands of people were killed, and innocent people just, in Chennai, that whole wave came up and washed away all those little shanties many people were killed, and it was terrible. And you say, why? Innocent people caught up in something like that. Now, it's easy to say, well, it's just their karma. But it was suffering, and nevertheless, and we find ourselves caught up in that. And of course, it is in the end karma, but still, why does not? But if we lived in a world where everything, it just manifested, there would be no world if there was not a world of duality. So we are in a world of duality. We have to accept it, and I think that question of why is what propels us to find the answer. And I know that's been my experience. Philosophically, you can read a lot of different things, but that's been you might say, propelling. Why? I want to know. And that desire to know is, I think, what drives many of us onto the spiritual path. So I guess that's another way of saying, I don't know. I want to find out, though. I do. Barakil, we have any more?
Yes.
Or should we come back next week?
As you wish. Do you want one more question?
Let's do one more. Now, I'm not going to close the door on Yama. If you come back, he said, oh, I should have asked, let's ask this one next week. Please do. But we will move from, I will speak a little bit more about Yama. I'm going to sum it up because I think that's only fair. Let me sum up Yama next week. And because I do feel impelled to make sure to touch each of these, which I haven't. And I'll sum that up next week and we'll introduce Niyama and we'll see how far we get. But I'm going to take as long as it takes, and then we'll move on. So if you have questions, you can come back next week and let's share them. But one more?
Yes. When it comes to non-covetousness, which basically Swamiji tells means not creating desires. And this question is it possible for us not to create desires as long as we are in this world?
I would probably say yes, but as long as we're in, if it's understood when we say as long as we're in this world, if we understand that to mean as long as we have vestiges of ego consciousness and we're acting from the bondage, and now the saint, the liberated soul, is not acting from that place, but yes. The answer is to some degree, yes, because as we started out by saying this, we're not perfected in any of these until we have transcended ego consciousness, which means the state of Jivan Mukta. Now, once we've attained that, then we could give a different answer. But as long as we are aspiring, we still have somewhere on the spectrum there's some degree of covetousness, of wishing, you might say, wishing for something. It could be very, very subtle, wishing for things to be other than they are. I covet peace of mind, or whatever it might be. Yes. So literally, the answer is there's always going to be a little bit of it there, but we have to do our best. You see, and this is like we want to move ourselves into more of a sattvic state approach to life because it's much easier in a sense. The chains of gold, they still bind, but they're a lot softer than chains of titanium or hardened steel, you see, a little bit easier to unwrap ourselves from. And then, or you might say it's a little bit, if you're giving God a gift, why not give God a beautiful gift rather than an ugly gift? And so why not give flowers, rather than whatever you might conceive of as the opposite of that. And so that's what we're doing when we perfect. We're trying to get rid of some of these darkening sides to our disposition. So we make a nice offering to God. But nevertheless, whether it's steel or gold, iron or gold, the important thing is to make the offering. You see, don't think, well, once I get perfect, then I'll take up the spiritual path and give myself to God. No, you have to do it wherever you are. And that's the more important lesson, is is not to make ourselves perfect. Oh, that's direction, yes, but to give ourselves to whatever degree that we can toward our beloved. So should we come back next week? So let's come back and we'll finish this. If you have more questions, let's go, because this is just a discussion. But I will sum it up, I hope, a little bit shortly. And then because we never really discussed brahmacharya and we didn't go much into parigraha too much. And we'll come back and sum up the powers that come with yama next week, just to summarize them. And then we'll move to niyama and go with that. So have your questions ready at that time. Okay, see you all next week, and may you have a lovely week ahead. Joy to you.